What's going on, everyone? So another exposure test video for this episode today, and the last one I did was Ilford's HP5, so black and white film, and the results were impressive to say the least. But today we're going to take a look at my current favorite black and white stock, and that is Kodak's TMAX 400. So one of my recent episodes about black and white film stocks, that was my first time shooting TMAX, and I definitely fell in love with the results and the look that this film provides. And after I shot that episode, I actually had an extra roll, so I headed to just a local spot here. You'll probably recognize it. And I figured I would just do one of these tests, as I can see myself working with this film stock quite a bit moving forward. So if you're new to this channel, probably best to take a look at some of the older tests that I did just to get a feel for them exactly. But basically, this one, what I did is I went 3 stops under all the way to 6 stops over, and then I sent the film out to a lab to get developed and scanned. And I've been sending all my work to Carmen C to Film Lab. I'm really happy with the results they give me, and you know, the whole point of this is just to give you an idea of what you could expect getting scans back from a lab and the kind of the flexibility you have. And then also what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show you the scans as they came back from the lab, and then also the edited ones where I made some tweaks to try and make them all kind of look the best they could be. So anyways, let's jump into it. We'll take a look. Okay, so jumping into things here, I will just note really quick, these were shot on the Pentax 672 with the 75mm 2.8, I believe, and these were all shot at f4, so aperture remained the same. Across the board, controlled the exposures with the shutter speed. But I'm actually gonna switch things from what I said. I'm gonna show you the edited versions, and then as we go through them each, I'll show you kind of how they came from the lab. But the edits across the board, I tried to keep them somewhat similar, but they did vary for some of the extreme underexposure and also some of the overexposure. Obviously, because these are scans, not every single one's gonna be the same, so the settings aren't always gonna match. But anyways, we will jump into it, and this one we're gonna start with is the normal. Looks really good. Like I said, I'm a big fan of this film. It's got a really great look to it. And as I've learned, it's also very flexible. Don't want to spoil things, but you'll see here as we jump into the first under, I'll pull up a side-by-side in a second, but you know, they pretty much look identical. And whenever I've done these tests with color negative films, pretty much right away, even one stop of underexposure, you start to get into some results that just for me personally, I want to stay away from. That's why I'm always trying to, you know, nail exposure or even just give the film a little bit of extra light. But this looks great. Let's pull up a side-by-side. So we'll do normal. I'll select one of them first. So normal's on the left. We'll do this and we'll make this a little bit smaller if we can. So normal's on the left, one stop or one stop under on the right. And yeah, they look great. They both look pretty much the same. Go back to just a regular view. So next up is 2 stops under, and actually, you know what? Let's jump back to 1. Like I said, I'll show you how they came from a lab on the way. So my edits for these were just super quick. This isn't necessarily how I'd get to my final results. This one, no tone curve adjustments. So this almost looked like it had almost no adjustments. So that is how it came from the lab. That's after. So didn't really have to do much at all for that one stop under, and it still looks great. So even at 2 though, you'll see, so the adjustments got a little more aggressive, just setting a black point, opening the shadows up afterwards a little bit, and exposure up a bit, but still not that bad in terms of getting it to a place where it looks like the other ones. And this is 2 stops of underexposure, so this was before, that's how it came from the lab, and this is after. And the thing is, what's really interesting is with color negative film, you obviously can edit them afterwards with the underexposure, trying to set the black point and stuff like that. But I found you could never, once those shadows started to lose detail, the color was never that nice and the results were just never that nice. But with this TMAX, with black and white, it's looking like, you know, you can set the black point, play with the contrast a little bit. And, you know, if we pull up a side-by-side, so again, normal's on the left, this is the edited 2 stops under on the right, and it looks great. So cool to know that if for some reason you ran into a situation where you had to underexpose this film, that, you know, even at 2 stops after some edits, as you can see, it doesn't look that far off at all. So we'll jump out just to this view, and then I'll be able to zoom into 200% on both of them. I just want to check out, see how the grain is with the underexposure. So this image still looks Still looks good, doesn't look bad at all. If we jump to the normal, it honestly doesn't look that much different. So impressive results. And then the next one up, this is 3 stops under. This is usually as far as I go just because in the past with the color negative stocks, I know even at 1, it's gonna produce some results that aren't great. But this looks nice, and you'll see that obviously here I was a lot more aggressive. Again, I did this quick, but setting the black points, just adjusting this curve a little bit. The shadows had to be opened right up. This is the before, this is how it came back from the lab. And this would be similar to color negative film in terms of how flat it would be, but like I said, even adjusting the black points and stuff, the color was just never great, and there was always kind of a lot of grain or a lot of noise afterwards. But it's cool to see that with these edits, if we pull up, so normal on the left, this is 3 stops under, edited on the right. Again, I wouldn't aim for this ever, but it's still interesting to see. The image isn't, it's a little more kind of flat for sure. And you know, you can see here in the windows of this car, we're starting to see a lot more grain, which is to be expected. But it held up surprisingly well, considering you can edit it afterwards. So cool to see. But yeah, before, after. Okay, so we're gonna jump into the overexposure now. Let me see if, okay, so this is over. And I think for this, you know, we're just gonna stick in this reference view because that's probably easiest to see the differences. So edits for this, very simple. This is after, obviously. That's before. All I did was I just adjusted the brightness a little bit, so exposure down, a little bit on the highlights. Again, some of these differences with these images being scanned at a lab, even if you scan them at home, every single frame is going to have some variance. So, you know, having to make these small adjustments on this one stop over isn't necessarily from the overexposure itself. It could just be from the scan. But, you know, it looks, when you compare the two, they pretty much look identical, which you would expect. 2 stops over. Getting a little bit more aggressive with these edits, mostly just kind of exposure and brightness. That's before, so it's just a little bit brighter than the normal, but again, could just be the actual scans themselves, but still looks great. When it comes to grain and all that, it looks pretty much identical, super clean to that normal version. Here's 3 stops, kind of more of the same, still looks really nice. Maybe starting to see a little bit of, you know, I guess like muddiness, or the highlights are becoming a little bit less vibrant, a little gray. This is 4 stops. You know, we're kind of slowly moving in this direction where it's losing a little bit of its punch. It's getting a little more flat. You know, the adjustments on this one, I think have all pretty much been the same. It's just the exposure I'm adjusting a little bit. You know, that's after. So as it's coming back from the lab, it's pretty bright. You know, this is 4 stops over. So having to bring that brightness down. But even at 4 stops, still looks good. Here's 5, more of the same. You can see up here in the sky, starting to get like a little gray, a little flat when you compare it to this normal exposure. That's really kind of punchy and got this nice look to it. And then last one is 6, still moving in that direction. But it's like, you know, with the HP5, it was the same thing. I shot the HP5 on a Pentax 645, so I think we did like 10 stops of overexposure or something. And it wasn't until it got to these really extreme ends that the film got really flat, or the scans got really flat. And you can see that this TMAX is trending in that way. But I mean, 6 stops, it doesn't look bad. I don't know how you would ever end up at this point. And that's obviously not why I do these tests, but it's cool to kind of see how flexible this is. But, you know, overall, what I pull from this, the underexposure surprised me. And I think that has, you know, as I test more black and white films, again, I'm kind of new to the black and white world, but whenever I underexpose color negative, it wasn't just trying to get some contrast and punch back into the image. It was mostly the color and the noise or the grain that didn't look great. But it's cool to see with this TMAX that, you know, even at 3 stops, you can, you know, edit this to look fairly close to the normal. I wouldn't want to end up at 3 stops, but for me, what's most important is knowing that, okay, 1 stop under, you know, I barely made any changes at all to this 1 stop under image, and it looks pretty much just as good as the normal. you know, even some room to kind of edit this without there being too much kind of noise or grain. So that's really interesting to see that one stop under is still good. And then cool to just see, as expected, you know, these 1, 2, even 3 stops, but really kind of 2 stops over. Almost looks identical to the normal. A few little brightness adjustments and stuff, but it could just be the scans. So really kind of cool to see how this film reacts overall, and it's good for me, you know, just wanting to work with this film stock a little more moving forward, just to know kind of the boundaries that I have with it. Okay, so overall, very interesting results, and you know, similar to that HP5, this TMAX seems very flexible. You know, that one stop under looked great, and then the overexposure it handled really well. You know, again, not that the point would ever be to overexpose by 3 or 4 stops, but it's cool to see that at 1 or 2, it still looks great. And for me, just like when I shoot color negative film, moving forward, I'd probably rate this at like 320, maybe 250, just to give it a little bit more room in the shadows when I'm scanning. But cool to see this, and glad I did it, considering, like I said, this is probably a film I'll be working with quite a bit moving forward. So anyways, hope you enjoyed this one. Just want to say thank you, as always. Appreciate all the support and all that kind of stuff, and I'll talk to you soon.